Now you can start.
Okay, yesterday's story, which everybody missed, is related in the schus of Elias and the Neshama of my brother's, the late brother-in-law who was killed in the Six-Day War. And his name was Yaakov ben Moshe. May he rest in peace and may his memory be for a blessing.
Amen.
And this story has taken my fancy. I read the story on Erev Shabbos, and Baruch Hashem, I've told it about 500 million times since then. So it goes like this. The Rebbe Rashab, who was the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, was the son of the Rebbe Maharash, who was the fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Rebbe Maharash was the youngest son of the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. And the Rebbe Maharash lived in the Tzemach Tzedek's house even after he got married. He was very, very, very close to the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek was grooming him to become Rebbe. And his children, the Rebbe Rashab and the Razor and Charamushka, no, she wasn't born yet, used to go, yes she was, they used to go into the Tzemach Tzedek every few days, at least once a week, and to be tested on their learning in Cheder. And it happened that that particular weekend, that Shabbos, there was a Sheva Brochas of one of the family front, and they came to Lubavitch, including Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok of Avruch, who was an elder brother of the Rebbe Maharash. I believe he was the second son.
Yeah.
And he had a daughter whose name was Shterna Sora. And Shterna Sora, at the time of the story, was 5 years old, and the Rashab was 4 years old. And they were all standing in the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek's room, and it just so happened, by pure, hashgacha protis, or coincidence, whatever you want to call it, she was standing next to the Rebbe Rashab. And the Tzemach Tzedek looked up and he said, Chatan v'kala. The Tzemach Tzedek didn't make jokes, so they realized he was saying that they're suitable as a shidduch, b'shamayim. So after Shabbos, they wrote out the Tanoim, they made a vote, and they agreed that they would get married in 10 years' time, and that they'd get 1,000 rubles a year. So by the time they got married, they'd have 10,000 rubles in the bank, and certain conditions were made that the wedding would take place in Avruch, not in Lubavitch, because that's where the Kala lived, and the Chatan would wear a shtreimel, and the Rebbe Maharash, 10 years later, was too sick to travel to Avruch, so he asked if the wedding could take place in Lubavitch, and they said no, and they didn't want the wedding in Lubavitch because they said that's where the Kala is, that's the privilege, and the father-in-law brought his new Chatan, a brand new shtreimel, but the Rebbe Maharash had already told the Rashab that he should never wear a shtreimel anywhere unless he's in Lubavitch. And there was a whole hoo-ha and ha-hoo and he-hoo-hey, and the father of the Kala decided he's breaking off the shidduch. So he went to the Kala, who was all of 15, and said, I think we should cancel the shidduch. And she said, the Rebbe, my grandfather, said that we are Chatan and Kala. So the Rebbe says, and that's it. Finito la comedio, nothing to talk about. Never mind if he's here, if he's not here, never mind if we see him, we don't see him. Once the Rebbe said, that's it. And Baruch Hashem, they got married, and Baruch Hashem, they were very happy. And Baruch Hashem, they had an amazing son called the Friedrich Rebbe, Rebbe Yosef Yitzchok, and she even lived and survived to get to America with her son. And she passed away about 6 months after they arrived in America. Her son, the Friedrich Rebbe, was in Chicago at the time, and he came on the Sunday. She died on a Friday. He came on the Sunday and discovered that there was no Beis HaKvoros for Chabad in New York. So he told them to go out and buy a plot of land, which is the same plot of land that they're still burying Chabadnik in, and she was the very first person to be put into that Beis HaKvoros. So when the Rebbe says that's it, there's nothing to talk about. Never and never, never. The Chaim and the Bracha.
Amen. So,
I love that stuff. I think it's amazing.
very English.
Yeah, why is it English?
Abstinent.
No. She could see.
The English are not
She
abstinent.
could see. Stupid. Something else. Bait.
Base. So now we come to the higher will. Right? So yesterday we explained a lot of things about the lower will. Now
will.
Ratzon.
That's connected to the lower world.
No, it's
Connected to this world down here.
no. It just means that there's will that is the result of our understanding of what we understand.
There's a higher knowledge.
We're not talking about knowledge, we're talking about will.
Ratzon.
Ratzon. Now, he says, in the Zohar it says, It Ratzon, V'it Ratzon. We said there's no such source, but close to it is what it says in the Idra. Aval It Ratzon le'ela, but there's also a higher will. שהוא למעלה מן הרצון הנולד מן הדת והשכלה שנתפס ומשיג בשכלו ובינתו עניין התפשטות גדולתו של הקדוש ברוך הוא.
So it's nothing to do with the person himself.
It's beyond anything that the person can comprehend. Of course it has to do with the person. It's just not dependent on what a person understands.
So it's just fed down. It's like,
Right.
what my computer picks up. It's nothing to do with the computer. It's whatever the messages are saying.
Again, but it's will before understanding. So it has nothing to do with how much a person understands God's creation. That he's both memale kol almin, meaning he's the light that fills our world and he's the light that surrounds our world. אלא נמשך מבחינת ביטול השגתו והשגת כל הנבראים לגבי מהותו ועצמותו יתברך. Rather it comes from the ability to nullify one's understanding, one's attempt to grasp and understand.
So a second, if this is higher understanding, and you mevatel all your understanding, what do you need the lower understanding for?
We're not talking about higher understanding.
What's
That's not understanding, it's will.
will? I keep getting the words.
Yeah.
If higher will is higher than low will, why do you need a low will?
Because it's higher than the lower will. And the way to get to it is to be mevato, meaning to nullify your understanding.
Personal.
Right, the way that you see things. Meaning, I say it another way, when you learn, you don't necessarily come with your understanding beforehand and then just fit the words into what you understand. That's one way. The way that Rav Yitzchak teaches it, it's a big deal by him, is that after you finish learning, at first you have to learn understanding using your mind.
Okay.
It's called a liba de dati. You have to learn using what you understand. If you don't learn that way, then the learning is worthless because you're just a parakeet. You're just repeating what you heard. So it has to integrate. It has to be memale kol almin. It has to be the light that fills all worlds, including your world. It has to integrate. But once you're finished, you have to clear yourself out completely. You have to go beyond what you understood. And so you have to make, in a certain sense, a void in yourself. Be mevato, nullify your understanding, what you understood. And then Hashem's higher will can appear.
So there is a part of it is understanding as well, in a sense.
In every process of understanding has to include that you understand things, otherwise what are we doing? But this is higher will, so you're saying. So when you're doing it, as we would call it, consciously, when you're following this process consciously, then you're doing it by first learning and then nullifying your understanding to allow the higher will to appear.
But if you've learned something and you've understood it, now shouldn't the next stage be, okay, if that's what Hashem wants, then I want to do it.
Yeah, then I want to do it, and so on. That's lower will.
Right. But now you've nullified the lower will.
But the problem is that what Hashem wants is only what you can understand.
Okay.
There's a higher understanding.
Hashem wants you to put on tefillin, you understand that. So what, you're not going to put on tefillin?
We're not talking about that. Talking about that. If you put on tefillin because of what you understand, then you've limited the will power. You've limited the will. It's lower will. Like we said yesterday.
What Hashem wants. That's why you do
it. Like we said yesterday, that the Jew who hears that oy vavoy if you don't put on tefillin, look at what's going to happen to you. And he puts tefillin on because of that. So it's still mitzvah. It's not that he hasn't done the mitzvah. But it would then be understandable that he wouldn't be able to understand. He would never be able to get to abstract concepts. And he would forever remain very coarse in his understanding. Will forever do things in a way that almost makes him seem like a brute. So he's still doing the mitzvahs, it's true. But you look at him and you say, this guy, the only reason he's doing things is to satisfy his own needs. Because in the end, he's afraid. He's afraid for his own skin. That's what he's doing. And that's not serving Hashem. So you're saying he's doing in the end the act, but he's not an Oved Hashem. He's not really serving Hashem. So the mitzvah's there. You can't take the mitzvah away from him. But the question is he becoming closer to Hashem? And the answer is no. He's close to himself. He's serving himself, actually.
He's saving his own skin.
Yeah, he's doing it out of self-interest. He can't reach that. That's called Ir Tata. He's afraid of the Onish.
No, he's frightened to offend Hashem.
Same
he loves
thing.
him so much.
That's already a higher level. And that he won't come to. Will never come to those emotions. Because he's always stuck in, what do I need to do to serve my self-interest? Baruch Hashem, that he understands that for his self-interest, it's a good idea for him to put tefillin on. So that's not bad. But to say that that's called Oved Hashem, it's hard to say it. He's not really serving God. He's serving himself.
Okay, so now comes an interesting question, which I've often thought about. You go to Mitzrayim, and you meet people who maybe either never seen tefillin or very limited times they've seen tefillin. And you ask them to put on tefillin, and you get different answers, right? So one of the things that I have said is that even if you don't really feel like doing it, or you can't do it, when you get a chance, do it. When you get a chance to do it, at least, remember that it has to be done. And do it for me. Do it for me, because I came here, and Hashem sent us, and we love you so much. Do it for me, and I'll know, I'll understand. You're not allowed to say that?
You can say it. I can't tell you what to say.
No, I'm saying you're not allowed to say that. Are you allowed to say that?
You're allowed to say that if that's what's going to work, but then again, it's a lower reasoning.
Very low reasoning.
It's not so low to do a favor for a friend. It's a nice thing.
Sometimes it works.
It's better than doing out of self-interest.
Okay,
So that's all the person can understand, and that's all they can understand. But usually, especially with a karkafta, I'm led to believe that what happens is that they do it out of some awakening in themselves, not because they know you or care about you or anything like that. Something awakens. One of the there's a lot of reasons why, but because of that, the Rebbe describes that when a person's a karkafta, first time he puts tefillin on in his life, so he's revealing his yichida. Yichida is the higher will. He's doing it because of some. It's not out of self-interest. It's out of some awakening that's beyond his self-interest, because he doesn't understand anything and he doesn't care. It doesn't mean anything to him really. So why is he doing it? It's coming from a higher place.
Some of them are very impressed by the fact that somebody's taken the trouble to take their day off work and come down and the river said to, and that has a hashpah on them. It really does make a difference to them.
Sometimes that's all you need, that somebody sees that somebody cares about you.
Right.
אוקיי. ועל ידי זה תתעורר הנפש לצאת מן הרתיקה. והוא בחינת תשוקה אוכלות הנפש ממש להתהפך אל חיק אביה, הוא מהותו ועצמתו יתברך דחולו כמי כלה חשיב ממש. He says, by annulling its understanding, the nefesh, the psyche, goes out of its garment, out of its cloak.
What is that garment? Yes,
the garment is how I understand. How I understand. Those are my garments. My garments of thought, speech, and action. So I go out of my garments. It means that I'm no longer trying to protect myself with what I know. Okay, I'm not trying to. Usually, what happens is the knowledge becomes a cloak on understanding. Meaning, what you know prevents you from seeing something new. This is what's called the paradigm. You have a paradigm in your head that says that things work a certain way. This happens in science all the time. They have a certain theory, and even after you see a dozen cases that don't fit the theory, you still hold on to it. Why? Because it's a cloak. Because every human mind works the same way, which is we prefer repetition and safety and certainty to doubt and uncertainty and novelty. We don't like those things. Nobody likes them. So you hang on to it, and you miss the ability to expand, to understand something new. These paradigms are they're very powerful. So this higher will is, in a certain sense, a breakup of the paradigms that I hold in my mind. It can break them up, it can shatter them, and bring new understanding, a new paradigm that I've never thought about. ולא שייך לומר ממלא כל עמים וסובב כל עמים, אלא בזיו והערה מאור אין סוף ברוך הוא, המאיר ומחיה כל עלמין. הוא בחינת מלכות אין סוף ברוך הוא. כמו שאומרים, מלך יחיד, חי העולמים, וכתיב, מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים. Whenever we talk about the light that fills all worlds or surrounds all worlds, the two types of it, the immanent and transcendent presence of God in the world, we're talking only about the Malchus that we've seen many, many times. Everything that we experience in those terms, that's what's called the Malchus of Ein Sof, the kingdom, the sphere of kingdom of the infinite. But the infinite itself, that he is alone, there's nothing else, and he's the life force of the world, and all that, it's before the world. הוא לבדו, הוא לא בגדר ממלא כל עמים, לא בגדר סובב כל עמים. He's not the integrated light, the immanent, he's not the transcendent light. He's beyond all these things, because those things already assume that there's a world, there's already something to relate to.
What are those things? Kalim?
What? No, they're lights. They're lights, but they're lights that either are immanent or transcendent, meaning they can either be integrated, they enter the vessel, we being the vessel, they enter in a way that it makes sense to us, that it connects us to the divine in a way that we're conscious of, or it's sovev kolamin, it's the surrounding light, which means that it's transcendent to us, that we have a sense maybe that there's something higher, but we can't fully perceive it, we can't understand it. Okay? So all that's a malchus, but hu levado, he himself, hu lo b'geder memale kol almin, lo b'geder sovev kol almin. He's not in these graspable terms. He's beyond them.
That's yesterday's Tanya.
Yeah? Veleit machshava tfisa beklal. That's everything in the Tanya. Yesterday included. And there's no thought that can grasp him. Ki atau kodem shenivra olam. When we say he's before the world, what we're trying to say is the world cannot contain the substance.
But we have a mitzvah that we have to understand the Shem.
Yeah? Where's that?
To know HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
So you have to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rambam says you have to know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists. But you have to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that I've never heard of.
I always understood that a person is supposed to try and understand who Hashem is, what Hashem is, what he wants from us.
His will, but not he himself. His will is the Torah. The Torah you should try to understand as much as you can. But even when it comes to the Torah, what he's saying is that there's two different facets. There's what the mind can grasp and what the soul can perceive. And then there's what's beyond. And the part that's beyond, you can only get to by nullifying your current paradigms. You can only get there by going beyond your experience as a human being. That's what it means that he is before, that he exists before the world is created. Because his existence is not dependent on the world. So you can't understand him through the world. You can't understand him through anything that is in the world, including Torah. Torah is in the world. It's something that was but there's an aspect of Torah that's beyond the world. Okay, but the normal Torah that we learn, that's in the world. And that we said is the unchangeable, the non-changing part of Hashem. ותשוקה הנפלאה הזו ורצון זה נמשך לנשמות והעיר בהתגלות הנפשם בחג השבועות על ידי מתן תורה בעשרת הדיברות. כמאמר הז"ל שעל כל דיבור ודיבור פרחה נשמתן. והיינו שהדיבור היה ממשיך להם תשוקה זו. שהדיבור הוא המשכה ממהותו ועצמותו יתברך לנשמות ישראל. So he says, in the experience of that higher will, or at least the yearning for it, we received on the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. That's what we relive each year on Shavuos. What happened there? It says that every time that Hashem spoke, their soul took flight out of their body. What does it mean? It means that it's like saying they died. They died. Everything that they thought they knew before was meaningless. Meaning all the paradigms that they had, everything that they thought about, everything they thought about themselves, the way they perceived themselves, the way they had an image of themselves, all disappeared. So it's completely annulled. And because it was annulled, they got a sense of what's beyond. And from then on, every soul has a yearning for this. So in that sense, Har Sinai happens every day. Because every day a person can come to this state of nullifying himself to such a level that he wants to go beyond everything that he understands, everything that he sees. You can have that every day, if he wants. That's what it means to live with Matan Torah every day. וזהו אנוכי השם אלוקיך דייקה, המאיר ומתפשט בך. That's why Hashem said, I am Hashem your God specifically. Why? Because I am now, through my speech, imbuing you with a feeling of what's beyond. Anochi is Misha Anochi. פירוש שאין מכיר משיג בחינת אנוכי אלא אנוכי בעצמי. So when he says the first word, I, the exalted I am what I am. Anochi Misha Anochi. That is imperceptible. That is incomprehensible. I am what I perceive, what only God can perceive about himself. But as much as this is ungraspable to the human mind, Hashem Elokecha, Hashem imbues this feeling that there is something beyond all my understanding into my very soul. Dehainu, nitzotz elokut hashoreh b'cha. And this is what's called the spark of divinity in each person. The spark of divinity is like the memory of what's beyond. It's like a recall of it. Where is it? Where is it put? It's in the Gulgolet. And this spark of divinity is in the skull. So how do we understand this now? That it says, again, the first verse was, Se'u et rosh bnei Yisrael legulgelotam. So he had the head and he had the skull. So he said, why head and skull? Because head, that's what we call the will, the lower will. Legulgelotam, that's already the higher will. The skull is already the higher will. So this is very interesting. Today's Chumash. He said, in the beginning he says, in Rishon he says, let's count them all, their heads and their skulls. In practice, only Reuben and Shimon, he counts the skulls. It's interesting. You go through it and you see. That in Sheni today, only Reuben and Shimon says, Lemishpachotam legulgelotam. But by all the others, the Gulgolet is gone. Only Reuben and Shimon. And I didn't see anybody say anything about it. I looked this morning, couldn't find anything. Interesting. I think all kinds of things about it. But basically what it's saying is that the Gulgolet means this memory, this spark of divinity that is beyond the will that's created by the mind. It's will that's antecedent to the mind.
So we mamish remember that?
So that's the spark of divinity in each person. That's the nitzotz. Because Hashem his people are part of him. That you will cling to God. What does it mean to cling to God here? It's to uncover the spark and to feel that I haven't yet perceived anything. So there's a very interesting, in the Arizal, there's one of the few places where the Rashash quotes Ramchal. Almost doesn't happen, from what I remember. So one of the few places he quotes him is in respect to this. Is in respect to this topic. What does he say? He says there's two tikkunim, there's two parts to the skull. One is called Gulgalta, and the next tikkun is called Tala Dibdolcha. We talked about this once. We talked about the Ged Ka'ar Pach. Gimel Tet is Gulgalta, and Tet is Tala Dibdolcha. 7 tikkunim altogether. So the first one, that's called the will of the will. So that's the higher will. But once you get into the Tet and the Tala Dibdolcha, you're already within the concealed mind. It's called Mochastima. It's already inside. It's already mind, relatively speaking, and there is understanding to the will, meaning there's a reason for the will, for what you want. But above that, in Gulgalta, there's no en tam kamus laratzon. There's no even hidden. There's no even concealed will. Yeah, and I didn't say this yesterday, but there's 3 levels of will, really, not just 2. Here he simplifies. He says really there's only 2. Another place he explains that there's really 3. What does it mean? It means that there's the will that comes directly from understanding something. So if I understand it's a good idea to have a house, I want a house, my will is entirely created by what I understand. That's called ta'am laratzon. Meaning, what I want is completely dependent on what I understand and what my ta'am is, what my reasons are. But this is the will that comes out of chokhmah. It's mamish out of chokhmah already, and the chokhmah is abba. We said many times that abba is ava, is to want. So abba in Aramaic, in Hebrew, literally means to want. It means to love. Ava v'ratzon, things go together. But above chokhmah, there's already the keter. So in the keter in general is will and pleasure. We know this from many times that he writes. It's 2 parts of keter. The 2 parts of the keter, so they're pleasure and will. Pleasure being the higher one, and will being the lower one. So that would already be the higher will. So that would fit here very nicely. They would say, tam laratzon, that's the lower type of will. That comes from what I understand. En tam laratzon, so that's called keter, and that's the arich. Arich is will in general. But in arich itself, it's also divided into 2. Meaning that the will itself divides into 2. And how they differentiate it, so in other places he explains this. It says, yesh tam laratzon, or tam kamus laratzon, ve'en tam kamus laratzon. In the lower level of arich, in the lower level of the keter's will, which again is entirely beyond you, but still, meaning it's antecedent to what you understand, it comes from a higher source. Your understanding is, at first, that there's no reason why I wanted this. But then if you search deep enough, you'll find that tam kamus laratzon. You'll find that there's some reason still there, but it's not a reason that you understood. Okay? Very important. It didn't come because... It's not that I understood something, I forgot that I understood it. It's something that makes sense to me, but I don't remember ever understanding this. So, but I know that I wanted whatever I wanted because, for instance, hopefully after you're married to a woman for long enough, you say, tam kamus laratzon. I wanted to get married, obviously for the wrong reasons, but it turns out that there was a good reason for it. And now that I'm married for a few years, I understand why. So I can't say that I was aware of that reason when I got married. On the other hand, now that I understand,
Got to the reason.
I'm happy with it, and I understand that this reason was always there, but I didn't know it. And slowly it's becoming I'm seeing it now. Again, I didn't make my decision because of this reason, because I wasn't aware of it. But now that I see it, that this marriage, it has these and these good properties and this relationship and so on and so forth, it's like you discover the reason as time goes on. It's a great thing. That's called tam kamus laratzon. There's a concealed reason for what you want. It was just you didn't know, you weren't aware of it. So that's tala dibdolcha.
Isn't that a shkocha pratis?
Everything is a shgacha pratis.
No, I'm saying, isn't that pure shkocha pratis? You went to
Could be.
do something, you had no intention to do it.
Good.
You did something even for a completely wrong reason, going somewhere else, but it worked out. It was good for you.
It didn't just work out, but you understand now
Yeah,
why
okay.
that's what you wanted.
Right.
You understand, and now it makes
My
sense.
sister-in-law with that car crash,
Okay.
and then wakes up and becomes from. So you understand that's how it had to be. That was the path. That was the train that you were on.
Again, there it sounds fatalistic. I'm talking about something you made a decision about. You made it. That's why I took marriage. You made a decision on the wrong grounds because of different reasons altogether. They're not relevant to the real reason, or maybe they're partially relevant. But the real reason is one you couldn't have known. But now you know it. But now you realize that all along, meaning if somebody very, very, very smart would have come along and told you, look, this is a good shidduch because A, B, and C, you would say, really? That makes sense to me. But you couldn't have seen that. There was no way you could have seen that.
Understand that either.
No, I think you would have understood.
No,
If somebody would have explained it to you really, really well, you might have been able to understand it.
I don't think that
The same thing is with Shabbos, for instance. Okay? There's a level of Shabbos you say to somebody, look, I can't explain to you why it's good. Come do it. After you come and do it, after you experience it, you'll begin to understand why it's good for you. But if I explain it to you now, you might not understand. But it doesn't mean that you necessarily won't understand. It could be that I'll give such a good explanation that it'll hit exactly what it needs to hit. And you'll understand.
you can persuade me from now for the next 1,000 years that that cake that your wife made is tasty. But it doesn't make any difference what you say. Until I eat it, I don't know. All the logic and all doesn't, until I eat it and I feel good and it was tasty and and it gives me strength and I run sitting there. That's it's only in retrospect. Some things that only in retrospect that you can.
So that's called tam kamus laratzon. So that's a tala dibdolcha. That's from the second tikkun of Arich and down. It's called mocha stima. It's called the concealed mind. Concealed doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It exists. But then there's a level above that called gulgalta. That's what he's talking about here. Here he's saying what later he explains is, or in different places he explains is, en tam kamus laratzon. That even after you experience it, even after you've been through it, you still cannot fathom the reason. You can't understand.
Or you can't
Can't.
get to the depths of it.
You can't get it. So there's all kinds of questions, exactly like what you're asking now. So what does it mean it's concealed reason, and I can't get to it? Is it because it's too deep? But if I keep searching,
going.
maybe I will find it?
Digging,
Well, what's the issue there? What exactly is the issue? So there's a very interesting, I said, the Rashash one time that I know of, he brings an explanation from the Ramchal. Rashash was the follower of the Arizal. Ramchal was ex hominum. He wasn't even a human being as far as they were concerned. What are you talking about? You invented stuff. We don't know what you're talking about. But you see that the Rashash did learn him. And he took some things from him. So the Ramchal gives a tremendous explanation, Dat Vunot, in his book, Dat Vunot. He says the difference between Tala Dibdolcha and Gulgalta is like this. And Tala Dibdolcha is something that has many, many facets to it. Okay? So when you go to look at it, you see a beautiful multicolored pattern.
Mosaic.
It's very, very complex and beautiful. But you can see it all at once. It has many facets to it. So he says, he doesn't connect it to will. I'm connecting it now. So if you would take, and the Rashash says this is how you should understand this. So if you go to Talid Ibdolcha, if you go up to what we call the Mocha Stima, to the Talid Ibdolcha, what you get is that it was concealed from me because it was too complex. I didn't have, I can't, my thought process was too weak. Like a 20-year-old who gets married, he doesn't understand what life is about yet. There's no way in the world he can appreciate why he married this woman and that it's going to be good for him. He could, even if I told him, what was he going to understand? He understands, oh, she's beautiful, I like the way she smells, I don't know, she talks nicely, she seems nice, I don't know, stuff that, who cares? Doesn't even matter. But that's what he sees. That as he grows older, he begins to appreciate the complexity of the picture that's in front of him. He says all those things were true, but that wasn't the real reason. Baruch Hashem that I got married for these stupid reasons, because I got so much more out of it. But I couldn't have appreciated the thing itself. That's sort of like Shabbos. He came, or this guy that you're putting tefillin on because he's doing it for you. He says, okay, I'll do it for you. In the end, that's not what's hiding behind the tefillin. Right. Doing a favor for a friend. It's nice. Okay, it's a good reason, but that's called tam kamus laratzon. There's a reason behind it, and you hit upon part of it. But the higher level is what's called Gulgalta. And about that, the Ramchal says, the reason you can never define the Gulgalta is because every time you look at something different. It's not a mosaic. It's just every time you go to it, you see something completely different.
The kaleidoscope.
No, the kaleidoscope is the mosaic.
The kaleidoscope changes the pattern all the time.
It's worse than that. One time it's a kaleidoscope, the other time it's a microscope, the other time it's something different every single time you look at it. It's completely morphs into something completely different. Why? Because that's where the infinite begins to appear. It says that is a level of will that you can't grasp in any way. There's no tam there. Because every time you come to taste from it, it tastes different.
Like the moment.
Okay, it's like many other things. But it's so different that you can't even connect it to the previous time. It's completely the opposite. What do you mean? One time it was bitter, now it's sweet. Now, what are you talking about? And every time you need it, every time you go back into this place, into the Gulgalta, you find something completely different. So that's a lot of what he means here. That the higher will that he's talking about is en tam kamus laratzon. It's beyond, there's no reason there. What I mean by there's no reason? Because the reason is supposed to always be true. But here, every time you go to look at it, it's something entirely different. You can't find what you thought. What you thought was true is no longer true. And so that's the sign of the higher will. Okay? In that sense, it's like dying between each time that you taste it. It's like Baruch Nishmatam. It's a different experience altogether.
New person.
כי הנה מהות הנשמות ועצמותן לא ירדה להתלבש בעולם הזה בגוף ונפש בעמית, אלא זיו הרע בעלמא מינם בלבד, הוא שמתפשט ונתפס בסר למידות כנזכר לעיל שהן הן כוחות הנפש. The same way that in the world, all that came down from God as a word to integrate into the world is called the Malchus of Hashem, the kingdom of Hashem. Same is true of the neshama. All that comes down into the body is just a light, it's just a revelation of the neshama. It's not the neshama itself. And what we call the revelation, that becomes the psyche's faculties, the abilities you have, so on and so forth. But the neshama is still is still connected above. It still has its source above. It's connected forever above. והשינויים הם למטה, מצד שינוי השגות בכוחות הנפש בלבד, והיינו לפי שהנפש אינה מתלבש בכוחותיה, לומדת אותה מלמעלה מבחינת מקיף בלבד. So he says, the same thing is true of the soul. It's just like the world. What is the reason that the soul is here? Because it's batel, it's nullified to God. And in that level of the soul, there's no changes. Everything is constant. What do you mean by constant? That if you look at it from below, you can't grasp it. You don't understand what's going on. You just can't get it. If I would tell you, nothing here is changing. It's all the same. What are you talking about? Everything here is changing. I'm changing. You're changing. Everything's changing. But that's the level that the soul understands. When you try to bring it down, it would be like every time it's something else based on where I am. But that itself is unchanging. But it can't be understood by the conscious faculties. So that's called the makif. ובשבועות על ידי מתן תורה נתגלה הרצון העליון שהוא למעלה מן הדעת. So on Shavuos, the day of the giving of the Torah, what awakens is to give us that feeling, to give us that will, that higher will that's not dependent on our consciousness. And then that's what we mean that we say all the souls were there. What do you mean all the souls were there? How come I don't remember I was there?
I don't know.
No, I don't remember getting the Torah at Mount Sinai. But I do. What do we mean that you remember? What do we mean that you were there? People don't know this. They think, so if I don't remember, then what? It means, do you feel that when you go into yourself, you find this spot which is constantly connected to Hashem. There's no change in it. And it's beyond your consciousness. It's beyond who you are. It's beyond what you define yourself as. Is there such a thing in you? Okay. Do you feel that? It's a famous thing that if you came to the Alter Rebbe, he asked you, do you remember Ma'amad Al Sinai? If you didn't remember, you couldn't go into the yeshiva, into his cheder. Only somebody who said they remember. So people probably heard this and they said, I don't remember. The Alter Rebbe wasn't, it's not a trick question. You have to understand what he's asking though. Do you remember the place where your soul leaves you? It's as if your soul is not connected to your body. And it's renewed at every moment. Do you feel that?
So what did people answer the Alter Rebbe?
The ones who wanted to be in the yeshiva were smart and they said yes.
You can't work on the Alter Rebbe.
Can't fool the Alter Rebbe. I don't think it mattered. I don't think it mattered to him if you actually experienced it. I think what mattered to him was that you understood what he meant. Because if somebody comes and asks you, do you remember Mount Sinai? If you say yes, you're a fool. Because nobody remembers Mount Sinai. What are you talking about?
I was standing with the Kohanim.
Yeah, but you don't remember who they were. You don't remember what was in there. You
there.
don't remember anything. The point is because the body wasn't there. So what was there? What was there is the residual feeling that there's a part of me that's beyond my consciousness. That's Ma'amad Al Sinai. That higher will, which predates all my understanding, all my paradigms about life, what needs to be done, what doesn't need to be done, all that is meaningless to it. And it has one purpose in life. It's connection with God, that's it. Can you understand that that's what we're asking? That's what I think the Alter Rebbe was saying. Do you understand that when I say, do you remember? Because who would have asked you such a question? Everybody understands it's a parable. So why are you asking me this? The question is whether you understand what the parable means. Do you understand what I mean when I say you remember Mount Sinai? Do you remember this place in yourself? Do you feel this place in yourself? Which is constant will to do God's bidding, and it's not connected to anything else in my life. ולכן על כל דיבור פרחה נשמתם, דהיינו שנסתלק למעלה מבחינת בגדר השכלה והשגה, להיכלל ולהיבטל במציאות ממש אליי ודונח בכלות הנפש ממש. And that's why it says that their soul departed each time that God spoke. Because it's a feeling that there's only God, there's nothing else. There's only my will to do what He wants. And everything else is meaningless. I'm not a soul in a body. This is all passing. It's not interesting. It's meaningless. I'm only going. Can I remember that point? That point, he says. That's what he said. That's what we started with today. You can only get to it through annulling the comprehension that you have. If you can't annul the comprehension, the paradigms that you have, then you can't get to that spot in the soul. Okay. Where?
Just out of interest.
What are you?
Just out of interest. Here, now, here. This little bit. Another aleph. Where did it go?
Oh, Aleph Bet. It means that it's Daf Aleph Amud Bet. That's how it is in the original printing. So that you know where you are in the original printing.
Oh.